The wind had teeth that night. It came down from the north in waves, the kind of cold that finds every gap in your coat, every crack in your resolve. The street lamp on the corner of Maple and Fifth flickered twice before settling into its dim yellow glow, casting long shadows across snow that had turned to ice hours ago. He almost missed it. Just a dark shape beneath the light, small and still. At first glance, nothing more than a discarded bag or a clump of frozen leaves pushed against the lamppost by the wind. But something made him slow the truck. Maybe it was the way the shape seemed too deliberate, too compact. Maybe it was just the lateness of the hour and the strange clarity that exhaustion sometimes brings. He pulled to the curb and left the engine running. The cold hit him the moment he opened the door. His breath clouded white and disappeared into the darkness as he crossed the street, boots crunching on salt and ice. Up close he could see it now, the small curve of a body, the faint texture of fur dusted with snow. A kitten, he thought. Someone's barn cat that wandered too far from shelter. He knelt down slowly, his knees protesting against the frozen pavement. The cold was already seeping through his jeans. The kitten wasn't moving. He reached out carefully, half expecting it to bolt, but there was nothing. No flinch, no breath visible in the air. Then he saw the markings. Spots, not stripes, tufted ears, even in their flattened state. The facial structure was wrong, too angular, too wild. The paws, even tucked beneath the tiny body, were oversized in a way no domestic kittens would be. His hands stopped mid-air. This wasn't a kitten at all. For a moment he simply stared, his mind catching up to what his eyes were seeing. A bobcat. A bobcat kitten, impossibly small, impossibly alone, lying beneath a street lamp in the middle of a residential street, during a cold snap that had already killed the miller's chickens and frozen the water in the church fountain solid. He looked around instinctively, searching for a mother that wouldn't be there. Nothing moved in the darkness beyond the street lamp's reach. Nothing answered the wind. The kitten's chest rose, barely, then fell again. He didn't think. He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped the small body as gently as his cold, numbed hands would allow. The fur was stiff with frost. Ice crystals clung to the tufted ears. The weight was almost nothing, like holding a shadow. The drive home took 7 minutes that felt like 70. Inside, the house was dark, except for the kitchen light he'd left on out of habit. He moved quickly now, his mind shifting into a mode he hadn't accessed in years. Not since the winter he'd found the injured hawk in the ravine behind his parents' property. Heating pad from the bathroom closet. Towels from the dryer, still warm from the evening's laundry. A cardboard box lined with fleece he'd been meaning to donate. He worked by the light of the kitchen lamp, his movements careful and methodical. The bobcat kitten lay motionless as he positioned the heating pad on its lowest setting, arranged the towels to create a nest of warmth without direct heat that could shock the system. Hypothermia was a slow thief. You couldn't rush the warmth back in, you had to coax it, degree by degree. He checked his phone. Past midnight now. The Wildlife Rescue Center wouldn't open until 8. He pulled a chair close to the box and sat down, watching for any sign of change. Just one night, he told himself. That's all. By morning he'd have the number for the rescue center. They'd know what to do. They'd have the equipment, the expertise, the legal permits. This was temporary, a way station. He was just keeping the small creature alive until the professionals could take over. The bobcat's breathing remained shallow, but steady. That was something. He must have nodded off, because the sound startled him. A soft padding of paws on hardwood, approaching from the hallway. He opened his eyes to find Milo standing in the kitchen doorway, his orange tabby coat catching the lamplight, his green eyes wide and alert. "Hey buddy," he whispered. "I know. Strange night." Milo didn't Milo. Instead, he moved forward with that particular cautious curiosity cats reserve for the unknown. His whiskers twitched as he approached the box, his body low and careful. The man expected hissing, or that Halloween cat arch of alarm. He'd seen Milo face down the neighbor's German shepherd without flinching, but this was different. This was a wild thing, a predator in the genetic sense, even if it was currently no bigger than Milo's own head. But Milo didn't hiss. He circled the box once, his nose working, reading scents the man couldn't begin to interpret. Then he sat, his tail curling around his paws, and simply watched. His ears were forward, not back. His pupils were dilated with interest, not fear. The man held his breath. After what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds, Milo stood and placed his front paws carefully on the edge of the box. He leaned in, sniffing along the bobcat's face, its ears, the top of its spotted head. The bobcat didn't stir. Milo's whiskers brushed against the frost-stiffened fur. Then slowly, deliberately, Milo began to groom. His tongue worked across the bobcat's frozen ears in long, patient strokes. The same grooming ritual he performed on himself every morning, the same attention he'd occasionally bestowed on the man's hand when he was feeling particularly affectionate. But this was different. This was purposeful. This was care. The man sat frozen in his chair, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had settled over the kitchen. He'd lived with Milo for 4 years. He'd seen the cat hunt, play, show affection, display irritation. But he'd never seen this instant, inexplicable adoption of something that should have triggered every prey drive alarm in Milo's domestic brain. Milo groomed for several minutes, then carefully stepped into the box, turned twice, and curled himself around the bobcat's small body. His purr started low and steady, a vibration the man could hear from his chair. The temperature in the kitchen hadn't changed. The heating pad was still set to low. The towels were still arranged just as he'd left them. But something had shifted. The man leaned back in his chair and watched his cat warm a wild thing with his body, his breath, his presence. Outside, the wind continued to tear at the eaves. The street lamp on Maple and Fifth flickered again, briefly, then held steady. He didn't understand what he was witnessing. He didn't have words for the quiet certainty in Milo's posture, or the way the bobcat's breathing seemed to deepen, just slightly, in response to the warmth and the purring and the grooming that continued in gentle rhythmic strokes. He only knew that something had begun, something that wouldn't end with a phone call to a rescue center at 8 in the morning, something that wouldn't fit into the neat category of temporary, something that asked a question he didn't yet know how to answer. Why would a domestic cat instantly adopt a wild predator that should have terrified him? The man sat in his kitchen chair, watching, waiting, while the night slowly gave way to the first grey hints of dawn. Morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds in pale strips, illuminating dust motes that drifted like snow. The man woke with a stiff neck, still in the chair where he'd kept vigil through the night. His first thought was the box, but when he leaned forward, Milo's green eyes met his first. The orange tabby was still curled around the bobcat, his body a perfect crescent of warmth. But something had changed. The bobcat's chest rose and fell with stronger rhythm now. Its tiny paws twitched in what might have been a dream. One ear flicked at a sound only it could hear. Milo lifted his head and blinked slowly at the man, that universal cat signal of contentment and trust. Then he lowered his face and continued grooming the bobcat's neck in long, patient strokes. The man reached for his phone. He should call the wildlife center. He should arrange the transfer, but his thumb hovered over the screen, hesitating. Over the next 3 days the pattern became routine. The man would try to separate them, lifting Milo out of the box to give the bobcat space, closing doors to create boundaries that might be safer, healthier, more appropriate for a wild animal in recovery. But Milo had other plans. Every time the orange tabby would sit outside whichever door blocked his access and cry, not his usual demanding yowl, but something softer, more insistent. A sound that seemed to ask, "Don't you understand? He needs me." And when the door opened, Milo would trot straight back to the box, inspect the bobcat with a thorough sniff, then resume his position as guardian and warmth giver. The bobcat, for its part, began to respond. On the second day, it lifted its head for the first time and made a sound, a tiny rasping mew that seemed too fragile for something wild. Milo answered immediately, mewing back in that chirping way cats use with kittens.
By the third day, the bobcat was eating shredded chicken at first, offered on a fingertip, then small pieces placed in a shallow dish. Its coordination was wobbly, its movements uncertain, but it ate, and after eating, it would instinctively search for warmth, pressing itself against Milo's fur himself. The meat is Milo's firm, Simploftus Milo's firm, till both are purring in talf, for purring in talf, purring in tand, Milo's firm, two legs.
The man watched Milo bring his favorite toy mouse to the box and drop it beside the bobcat. He watched Milo groom those oversized paws, those tufted ears, that spotted face, with the same meticulous attention he gave to his own coat. He watched the bobcat begin to mirror Milo's behaviors. The slow blink greeting, the head bump of affection, the way of stretching after sleep. But he also saw the wildness that remained, the way the bobcat's pupils would dilate at sudden movements, the instinctive crouch before pouncing on the toy mouse, more predator than play. The climbing, oh, the climbing. Within a week, the bobcat had learned to scale the curtains with claws that hooked into fabric like fish hooks, hanging there and surveying the room with eyes that seemed to calculate distances, trajectories, escape routes. The wildlife center's number stayed in his phone. He told himself he'd call tomorrow, then the next day, then the day after that, because something unusual was happening here, something beautiful. Milo had given himself completely to this tiny wild thing, not as owner or keeper, but as parent, teacher, companion. And the bobcat, against all instinct and evolution, had accepted. The man stood in his kitchen doorway one evening, watching them sleep together in a patch of fading sunlight. Milo's paw was draped across the bobcat's shoulder. Their breathing had synchronized. 3 weeks became 6. The bobcat grew, not gradually, but in sudden bursts that seemed to happen overnight. Paws that had once fit in the palm of the man's hand now stretched wide with developing muscle. Legs lengthened, lean and powerful. The spotted coat thickened into something that caught the light differently, not soft like Milo's fur, but dense and weather-ready. Play fighting intensified. What had been gentle batting between the two became something more primal. The bobcat would stalk Milo through the house, body low, hindquarters wiggling before the pounce. They would tumble across the living room floor in a blur of orange and spotted brown, rolling and grappling with increasing force. But Milo never hissed, never retreated, never showed fear. Even when the bobcat's strength clearly surpassed his own, even when those oversized paws pinned him down with pressure that would have sent any other cat fleeing, Milo would simply wait for the game to end, then groom his wild companion's face as if nothing had happened. The man watched these exchanges with growing unease. He made the call he'd been avoiding. The woman at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center listened patiently as he explained the situation. The rescue, the unexpected bond with his cat, the weeks that had passed. Her response was professional, but clear. "He's healthy enough for transition," she said. "The longer he stays in a domestic environment, the harder it will be. He needs to learn to hunt, to establish territory, to exist as what he is. What he is." The words stayed with him after he hung up. He looked at the bobcat, currently stretched across the back of the couch in a patch of afternoon sun, looking for all the world like an oversized house cat. Then he looked at Milo, curled beside the wild creature in perfect trust. The enclosure took him 2 weekends to build, 8 feet by 12 feet, positioned where the old garden shed used to stand. Chain-link fencing, elevated platforms, hiding spots, climbing structures. A controlled space where the bobcat could experience the outdoors while remaining safe. The first time he carried the bobcat outside, Milo followed, crying at the door. Inside the enclosure, transformation happened instantly. The bobcat's entire body language shifted. Its ears swiveled, catching sounds beyond human hearing. Its nose worked the air, processing scents, earth, wind, prey, possibility. It climbed the highest platform in seconds, and stood there, scanning the tree line with eyes that suddenly looked nothing like a pet's. It stalked a moth with precision that made the man's breath catch. It marked territory with deliberate scrapes against the fence posts. It moved like water, like shadow, like something that had never belonged indoors. Every evening, though, it would press against the enclosure door, looking toward the house, looking for Milo. And every evening, Milo would sit on the other side of the glass patio door, waiting. The man stood between them one night, watching this silent vigil. The bobcat was strong now, confident, undeniably ready for the life it was meant to live. But letting go meant breaking the bond that Milo had formed, the bond that seemed to define them both. Spring arrived with green urgency. The bobcat was nearly full-grown now, all muscle and instinct, pacing the enclosure with a restlessness that spoke of readiness. The wildlife team arrived on a morning thick with fog. They would supervise the soft release, a staged transition that would give the bobcat the choice to return if needed, but the freedom to claim the forest if it called to him. The man and Milo walked the enclosure one final time. The bobcat approached them both, pressing its broad head against Milo's smaller one, in that slow, deliberate gesture they'd shared 1,000 times. Milo groomed behind the bobcat's ear, his purr audible in the quiet morning air. Then the gate opened. The bobcat looked back once, at Milo, at the man, at the house that had saved its life. Then it turned and walked into the trees with fluid, purposeful strides. No hesitation, no backward glance, just wilderness reclaiming what had always belonged to it. The silence in the house was immediate and absolute. Milo wandered from room to room crying softly, not his usual demanding meow, but something plaintive, searching. He sat by the patio door for hours, watching the empty enclosure. At night he curled in the cardboard box that still sat in the corner of the kitchen, the one lined with towels that no longer smelled like anything but time. The man worried he'd made a terrible mistake. Then 4 weeks later, he checked the trail camera he'd mounted at the forest edge. The footage was time-stamped 11:47 p.m. Movement triggered the camera's night vision, and there, standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the porch light, was the bobcat. Bigger now, fully wild in posture and presence, eyes reflecting green in the camera's infrared glow. But standing, watching the house, the audio caught something that made the man's breath stop. 2 soft meows, recorded from somewhere beyond the frame. A response to Milo's cries from inside. The man didn't think. He opened the back door. Milo was beside him instantly, and the sound he made was neither greeting nor question. It was recognition, pure and simple. The bobcat didn't approach the porch. It stayed at the forest edge, where wild things belong. But it lowered its head, and Milo, without fear, without hesitation, walked halfway across the yard. They touched noses in the moonlight. One breath, one moment of connection that bridged 2 worlds. Then the bobcat turned and melted back into the trees, leaving only the whisper of disturbed ferns and the memory of spotted coat catching starlight. Milo sat in the grass for a long time, watching the darkness. When he finally returned to the porch, he walked past the man without his usual cry for attention, jumped to the windowsill, and settled into his watching position. But this time, he wasn't waiting, he was remembering. The man stood in his doorway, looking at the forest that had taken back what he'd saved. The bobcat had stayed only one night in that box beneath the kitchen lamp, wrapped in towels and borrowed warmth. But he'd left a bond